Do you have too much freedom? Is the problem in Oklahoma that the people of Oklahoma have too much freedom? You might not think so. I don't think so. But I met one group that does think so, and that is apparently the Oklahoma Ethics Commission. This is a group of people, you don't get to vote for them. They're all appointed, and they have what you might think is a simple task. The task is to regulate the ethics, or really to come up with a system of regulating the ethics of state government officials and state employees, right? So we're talking about legislators, executive branch officials, and government employees. This is important, right? We don't want graft in our government. We don't want people bribing government officials. We don't want government officials soliciting bribes. And so there's a whole code of rules about that, and about the relationships of people who lobby with legislators and people in the executive branch. None of that is that surprising. Here's what is surprising. Right now, the Oklahoma Ethics Commission is considering proposed rules that would turn you into a lobbyist. I can almost guarantee that. Into a person who could be subject to lobbying regulations, even potentially lobbying reports. You don't think so? Here's what they're proposing. They're proposing that anyone whoever talks to anybody else about pending legislation, right? So there's a bill in the legislature about, you pick whatever you're interested in, and you think it is the best idea they've ever had, or you think it is a terrible idea. You share that information with somebody else, person to person, over the phone, on Facebook, on a website, on a blog, wherever. You are a lobbyist if they adopt these proposed rules at the Oklahoma Ethics Commission. No, literally, you would be considered a quote-unquote indirect lobbyist, subject to regulation. Now, this makes no sense because there's no connection, or as the lawyers would say, there's no nexus, there's no link to the ethics of government officials, right? When somebody who's paid by a corporation goes and takes a legislator out to dinner, obviously that can relate to ethics in government. But when you get mad and tell somebody they better not pass that stupid bill in the state Senate, and you know what, why don't you call your legislator and tell them so, right? When you do that, you're not thinking you're a lobbyist. Nobody's thinking you're a lobbyist, and it has nothing to do with the ethics of government officials, right? I mean, this is the first reason why this makes no sense. I described some other problems with this in my testimony before the Oklahoma Ethics Commission. I'm going to show that to you right now and then wrap up with a few more thoughts. I'm Trent England at the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs. This is from a hearing before the Oklahoma Ethics Commission. Trent England with the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs. A group of soccer moms hear about a piece of legislation. They're concerned about it. They decide to post some information about it on their Facebook pages, and they're indirectly lobbying. And they, of course, don't know that. But then they decide they're gonna maybe pool some money and send one of them around the state to speak at PTA meetings, right, to talk about this, right? They're indirectly lobbying. They're doing all these things, right? A church or a nonprofit posts information about an issue that happens to be before the legislature. Maybe they know it's before the legislature. Maybe they don't. But assuming they do, they're clearly indirectly lobbying. But they wouldn't know that, right? Not necessarily. A friend of mine the other day was asked to go out to another organization's meeting and talk to people about, help people share their stories with legislators. Sit down and write handwritten notes about something that had happened in their own life, sharing that information with their own legislators. And the point of it all was to encourage legislators to do something. But these are handwritten notes from citizens in their district, right? I take it that clearly would be indirect lobbying. Nobody would necessarily know that. Institute for Justice about 10 years ago took a group of 255 citizens and gave them the rules related to, in that case, citizen expenditures dealing with ballot measures. So something somewhat similar as was mentioned in the presentation. And the purpose was to determine whether people could figure out how to comply with these rules. And very few people could. No, actually that's not true. Zero. Not a single of those ordinary citizens could actually comply with the rules and regulations that were sent out for them. That's my first concern about all of this. This is exactly the kind of behavior right? The kind of citizen engagement in politics where regulations have a chilling effect. And there's no question in my mind that regulations like this, the way they're written today, would have a chilling effect on people's freedom of speech. That's the first concern. And it's also why, frankly, I mean, we should be concerned about that even if it was legal. I mean, hopefully this body, even if it was legal, would be concerned about allowing democracy to operate and not allowing the concerns of a few legislators to override people's ability to engage in freedom of speech. But we actually have a state and federal constitution that protect those things and make regulations like this illegal. Another reason is that people are protected against freedom of speech. Someone mentioned the Federalist Papers. This regulation would treat the Federalist Papers like a pack of cigarettes in need of a warning, in need of a disclaimer at the bottom, right? In need of disclosure. That's, to me, shocking. And it would also, I mean, say this was mentioned already by Mr. Ferrati, the NAACP of Oklahoma wanted to engage people of Oklahoma in some kind of legislative advocacy, wanted to let people know about something that was going on in the legislature, and of course this would require them to disclose their donor information. There's a great case on that as it happens. Finally, as was also mentioned before, it is easy to understand why regulating the conduct of lobbyists who come into direct contact with state officers and employees relates to, there's a nexus with the ethics of state officers and employees. Regulating the behavior of citizens who are not coming into contact with state officers and employees has nothing to do with the ethics of state officers and employees, right? I mean, unless they are unable to sift through their email inboxes, right? Or unless they are concerned about hearing from the citizens of the state of Oklahoma, but that's a separate issue, right? Regulating the private political activities, so-called indirect lobbying, of individuals in the state of Oklahoma has nothing to do with your commission's duty to regulate the ethics of Oklahoma officials and employees. And so I don't see how this even fits within the mandate of the commission, but it's also clearly unconstitutional and therefore illegal. Thank you. So that was my testimony before the Oklahoma Ethics Commission. They are going to vote on these rules in January. Hopefully, obviously, they will not move forward with these rules. They were sort of promising people after the meeting that they're going to make these more narrow, easier to understand, that they don't want this to apply to soccer moms. I mean, who knows, right? Nobody thought that they were going to propose regulations like this. Again, most Oklahomans don't think that the problem in our state is that we have too much freedom. But just to reiterate one more time, I mean, what they are considering would have required warnings, government warning labels on the Federalist Papers, on the Anti-Federalist essays, as if these are the equivalent of packs of cigarettes. Right? I mean, this is outrageous. It's unconstitutional, but it's worse than that. It is the worst kind of government overreach, trying to reach into your life, trying to reach into my life, trying to reach into the lives of people who care enough to get involved in our government, and saying, well, you've got to kiss the bureaucratic ring. You've got to include the right warning statements, the right disclosures, or else. And you know, this is something else they said. They said, well, we would never go after soccer moms. Well, that's just the point, right? Or else they won't do anything unless some government official happens not to like you, and then you'll be subject to fines, subject to potentially prosecution because you didn't dot all your I's and cross all your T's and kiss the right bureaucratic rings. This is an outrageous proposal, and you know, a trigger warning, I guess, for the Oklahoma Ethics Commission. Trigger warning. You should call them and let them know that you think this is an outrage. I'm Trent England at the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs. Thanks for watching.